Hello
Hello
there.
there. Welcome back to another episode of Star Wars in a Galaxy, watching all the Star Wars we can get our hands on. I'm Eli.
I'm Jacob.
And today we are back finally with another episode of Star Wars in a Galaxy. Today we are continuing on with our journey of droids. We watched the 9th episode of Droids, Coby and the Starhunters, which is the beginning, which was the end of the Tamuzan arc. And then we watched the TV special that leads into our final arc, which I'm calling the Mungo Baobab arc, which because Mungo Baobab is the droid's master name in this final arc, and that is called the Great Heep. So the Great Heep is a TV special, and it was around twice the length of a normal Droids episode. So we had around an hour of stuff to watch for this week's recording, as opposed to our normal 14 minutes.
In Coby and the Starhunters, the droids accompany Prince Coby to join the Imperial Academy, along with Jann, who is waiting for the results of his own application. While changing ships on the shady planet of Lakesh, Coby and the droids are looking at used spacecraft, and Coby's pet is kidnapped. R2-D2 and Coby buy a ship to chase after the kidnappers, and they end up attaching their small ship to the kidnapper's ship, riding with it in hyperspace to the planet Dandalo. When they detach in the planet's atmosphere, they run out of fuel and crash. They are found by the local Fuzzum species, who have been displaced from their homes by the Starhunters. C-3PO convinces the Fuzzum to help rescue Coby's pet, whose name is Inji, we find out. C-3PO imitates a wild animal call as a distraction, and Coby and R2-D2 sneak into the base to rescue Inji. They meet a human named Greed, and after a big scuffle, they successfully defeat the Starhunters. Coby decides to go with Greed, who made it his mission to return all the animals that the Starhunters had captured and return them to their natural habitats. And Jann, who also came back to rescue them at the last minute, is accepted into the Imperial Academy, and he parts ways with the droids, because droids are not allowed at the Academy.
Yeah, and in the Great Heep, R2 and 3PO travel down to the planet of Biitu, where they're supposed to meet their new master, Master Mungo Baobab, who's a merchant. Mungo Baobab was going down to Biitu to try and harvest some. I think he was going down just to do business with the people of Biitu, right? Is that correct?
Yes, I believe so, yes.
And so basically they cannot find Mungo Baobab. So instead they do find that the skies and atmosphere of the planet of Biitu are being completely evaporated, and that the planet has been taken over by a droid called the Great Heep. He came to do business on the planet, but instead he was captured and imprisoned by the Great Heep, who is mining various ores and just absolutely scavenging the planet of Biitu. We all think this is another local criminal effort, but it is revealed that the Great Heep has been employed by who else but Admiral Screed from the end of the From Gang arc. This is an Imperial project at harvesting the planet of Biitu, and we also learned that the Great Heep is powered by a bunch of astromech droids in what's called a droid harem, which was basically a bunch of we'll get to that, trust me. It was basically a bunch of astromech droids that he puts in his mouth, and then they recharge him, and then they're basically fried away. And that's how he gets his power to do the crazy things he does. And so they decide, with the help of two natives named Fidge and his pet Chub, C-3PO, R2-D2, and R2-D2 rescue Mungo and manage to free the planet from the tyranny of the Great. And they go out and follow Mungo Baobab and continue their adventures in the galaxy. So that's a very basic summary of the episode, but that is, for all intents and purposes, what happened. So you want to get into this?
Yeah, so Cody and the Starhunters. I don't know what you thought. I thought it was a very interesting episode.
It was
It had a
definitely
lot of
yeah.
it had some, it has a signature droids moments that we've come to love so much. I know I sound like a broken record. Also, I apologize if I sound a little bit off. I'm feeling a bit under the weather right now, so that would explain it. I really like C-3PO's expressiveness in this episode, especially. It's just so delightful. It works so well. And I'm really coming around to the music as well. The show is just, it's a vibe. There's no
Yeah.
other way to say it. It is
Oh, absolutely.
it is a vibe.
there's a great like sensation that comes, especially after seeing the theme song and like in trouble, in trouble again, and then hearing that familiar sci-fi
Yeah,
tune.
it's as ingrained. It's as ingrained into my brain at this point as the Clone Wars theme or the Rebels theme was
Oh,
when we were
100%,
watching
yeah.
those shows
Um,
every single week.
yeah, and this is interesting. I just find it interesting that we start with Coby being a major asshole. Like he is an entitled brat, basically.
Yeah,
He
I mean he's a
like
brat for most of this episode.
and I'm surprised actually. I didn't think at the beginning that they were going to successfully turn him around. And I'm not saying that they did it successfully, but I'm saying they made a valiant good effort. I think it was a little like I think they could have played down his dickishness at the start a little bit to make it a little bit more believable. But he did have a character arc, and I liked the ending they gave him with what's his name, the human, the Greed, with Greed to go take all the animals that were captured by the Starhunters back to the planets that they belong to. I think that's a really wholesome ending to this arc, and I feel like it matches a lot of sentiments from like native groups in our real world to return certain artifacts from museums that were produced by people who colonized. I don't know. That's what made me think of, and like the idea of like giving the artifacts and giving stuff taken and put in museums back to the people who owned it in the first place before they were invaded by colonial forces. And I thought that's a really interesting idea. And I think there's a lot to that. And obviously they were not trying to make that analogy because it was the 80s and this is a relatively new and progressive, unfortunately, idea. But I find it interesting as a parallel.
Well, I think it's an idea. We certainly know it's an idea that's been around. It's been around forever and ever. Only recently has it, become more popular in the mainstream. To most people, I think I would say. But
Yeah.
it made me think of, when I think about Star Wars, we think about the messages of Star Wars. We spend some time talking about this, quite a bit of time. Environmentalism is not usually one of the things that really comes to mind when we think about the messages that Star Wars really has to offer on the whole.
Why
But
not?
I was pleasantly surprised.
Yeah.
I like that message. It's just not something that really comes forward. We talk about corporatism. We talk about there's identity. Sometimes we talk about fascism and politics a lot, but it's not
Yeah.
really something that comes up as much
Though I will
as
say
some
there are
other
other
topics. So it was
examples.
cool, especially there are other examples of it, especially as we'll get to in the
The
Great
Great
Heap.
Heep. Yeah.
So that's what it made me think of.
I think actually
But
Andor did that quite a bit well with Aldani,
oh yeah,
where
oh yeah, sure.
the Imperial oppressors didn't understand the planet the way that the natives did, and the eye was the thing that left. And I think there's also remember that episode of TCW Mercy Mission where where C3PO and R2, ironically enough, have to figure out the disturbances on the planet and achieve that natural harmony between the Alina that live above and the other stuff like Orphney and like the Ents or whatever they're called. I forget what they're called to achieve balance on the planet. That seems very like much like an ecological message.
Yeah, yeah.
And I
And
also believe there's an episode
there
of
are other
Resistance
examples.
in season 2 called I think it's called From Beneath, which is a pretty clear climate change allegory. So I think it's a message that Star Wars has been slower to pick up because it's not incredibly obvious with Star Wars's brand, but it's there nonetheless. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, it's there, but I enjoyed seeing it because I don't see it as much as I see other messages. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It just inspired me that you're saying we didn't see it. I'm like, well, have we? It inspired me to like be like, what other examples of this do we see in Star Wars?
Yeah, fair enough. What else do we think for
Well,
Zalakash? I feel like there's not really a whole
yeah,
lot to
I said that Zalakesh is the droid's version of Dayu, and I'll stand by that.
mm, I do like one little detail I really liked was the little I think they looked like marble balls, like a packet of marbles kind of that they're using for money. I don't know, I just thought that was kind of cool. Really
Yeah.
a droids moment right there. Something I enjoyed.
Yeah, I found a lot of parallels here because I felt like immediately after touching down on Dandalo, they get captured by a native tribe very briefly on Dandalo,
Oh
and
yeah.
like I feel like I feel like Coby and the Starhunters was a major influence for Nomad droids. like specifically. I know the whole series was an influence for nomad droids, but I feel like this one specifically, and Great Heep actually, like taking down a fascist robot overlord. Those are the two main plots of droids. Those are the two main side plots of droids. I'm
Yeah,
not
I mean,
saying that they were
speaking
taken
of,
directly, but it's nice seeing where some of those ideas might have come from.
yeah, I was kind of interested. I really noticed. I was kind of wondering if Dandelo was any inspiration for the Kashyyyk system, because I don't know, I just noticed the trees look very similar if we're talking about it. But if we need to talk about inspiration, we need to talk about how this entire the entire Dandelo part of the story feels a little bit or a lot at times like just the Return of the Jedi Endor,
I
that
drew
part of the
that parallels
story
too. Yeah,
just kind of recycled. You have this like primitive-ish native warrior-like species, teaming up with the outsiders to take down a force. We even have some net traps. Have some net traps thrown in there for good measure, and especially for something that came out as this and Ewoks. It was the first like on-screen Star Wars offering since the first three movies that started it all. So I kind of wonder why they seem to hew so closely or use this strategy so much of kind of recycling ideas from the original trilogy. I know, what do you think about that?
I think that again, I think Star Wars wasn't taken as seriously during this point. I think that Star Wars is and I'm not saying it wasn't taken seriously. They obviously took this show very seriously, but I think I think that Star Wars as a franchise was still a very new idea. I think it was very much viewed as the trilogy. And oh yeah, we're doing something on the side here, and this doesn't really matter. It's just R2D2 and C3PO palling around.
Just something for the
Yeah, just
Saturday
something for the
morning
Saturday morning
cartoon
cartoons.
heads,
Yeah, I'm gonna push back on the Kashyyyk thing because I don't think it was an inspiration for Kashyyyk because Kashyyyk was actually seen before this.
Really?
Um,
Wait,
Kashyyyk was
correct
seen
me.
for the first time in the animated portion of the holiday special.
Oh,
Oh, and also
what?
in the in no, not
Oh my
on the
gosh,
animated, the
I
live
didn't know
action
that.
part of the holiday special. The live action part of the holiday special.
Wow, bro.
It
No
wasn't
way.
called It wasn't called Kashyyyk. It was actually called Kazook.
Zook. Wow.
Yeah, Kazook. And
I stand corrected. My goodness, I did not know that. That is very, very cool.
small spoiler, that actually was a question for the Legends exhibition match in Epic Confrontations that we filmed a few weeks ago. I'm very excited for everybody to see that. And there were some people surprised by Kashyyyk originally being named Kazook. So we actually know of Kashyyyk's origins, and Kashyyyk actually, as Kazook, was actually originated, I'd say, what would it be? Around like 7 years before this. So that's interesting. What was I gonna say? Yeah,
That
but
is interesting.
yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if you saw this in the episode. I mean, of course you saw this in the. There's that droid that confronts them that's working for the Starhunters, and it looks like a freaking transformer. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah. There's a lot of droids that kind of,
Yeah,
especially in the next episode as we'll get to.
I know, but
Like,
like
are they
this
are
one
they
specifically
Transformers?
looks like a transformer.
Yeah, no, I know
Let's
the one that
see.
you're talking about. I do know the one you're
I
talking
wanna
about.
see. I'm looking on Wikipedia to see exactly what it is. Droid
Right?
models. Maybe it's the patrol droid. Maybe it's these patrol droids. Yeah, I think it's the patrol droids, but they look like freaking transformers. And I don't know, that took me out of it a little bit, but they take their swings and they take their misses. Yeah, the Fuzzums, which are the species of the tribe, definitely raised some callbacks for me of Endor and the Ewoks. Absolutely. I don't know if you saw this, but C3PO told R2 the odds, which I thought
He
we
did
were
tell
gonna
him the
get way
odds.
before this, and I'm surprised it took us like 9 episodes into this show to get C3PO talking about the odds of something succeeding, honestly.
I mean, now that you mention it, I think you're right. I am surprised by that.
Yeah. And what was I gonna say? And so then we meet Greed, who basically, like, again,
Mm.
they captured this guy. It's
Just
one
stuck him
thing
in
to
a
capture.
cage, basically.
Yeah, it's one thing to capture a creature, but this is an actual person that they just basically enslaved and captured. Like, the hell.
Yeah, no,
Um,
you're crazy.
it's like a fucking criminal gang they're running on Dandelo, and like again, I think that the Empire probably has no idea what's going on because they're too busy, doing their stuff, and they don't really care about this minor crime stuff. But holy shit,
They don't care at all. They don't care at all. I think
yeah,
I don't know. It's interesting the way that it kind of it's interesting the way that it kind of plays out with the gang. Because I do think that, that we have this kind of crime, flourishing in the Empire's shadow, kind of, they're kind of
Yeah.
allowing everything to happen the way it does, at the same time as, having, of course, as we know from all the lore and everything, they're very, order, peace, tough on crime kind of messaging. I think it's interesting that the show kind of, maybe not purposefully, it kind of gives us another example, taps into that a little bit. I think that's, something that we could see a little more maybe in season 2 of Andor, kind of the political, the way that the Empire messages. That's definitely not something that they lean into in this show. Obviously, it's the kids show Saturday morning, which is fine, by the way. It's great. I love it. Um, but I don't know. In terms of messages, things to talk about in this episode, it felt a little thin. Definitely one of the more one-dimensional of the episodes, I might
Yeah,
say.
I thought it was
The biggest
interesting for me. I thought was interesting for me, at least, the I don't know, there was a few moments in there that I thought Greed was gonna die. And I'm like, are they really gonna do this in a kids show? And
Yeah,
they
have
had
we
me
seen
legitimately
anyone
worried. I don't think we've seen anybody die. I don't think we've
we
seen
haven't
anybody
seen
die in this
any
show.
living being die in this show.
No, I don't
We've
think
seen
so.
we've seen droids get dismantled, but yeah, it's very tame.
Yeah, yeah,
It's very
it's
tame.
very tame. They're even the villains always get away at the last second, or blah blah blah.
Well, except for the
But
Great Heep. We'll get to
oh
that.
yeah, the great, but even that's a droid. Even the Great Heap's a droid.
Yeah.
So that's still not breaking the rule. That is still technically not breaking the rule. So what was I gonna say? But I was legit convinced Screech was gonna die for a few seconds. And then there's the jugadoo gambit. The jugadoo
Oh, the
gambit is
jugadoo
so
gambit.
fucking weird. The
Obi-Wan would be proud though.
the
Imitating an animal's call, Obi-Wan would be proud.
Yeah, he would. My favorite part is the unintended consequences of C-3PO imitating the Jugadoo, which is an actual Jugadoo finds them, which is
And falls in love
fucking
with C-3PO.
hilarious. Yeah,
Yeah.
and there's that there I think maybe one of my favorite lines from this entire series. This could never work between us. A plus, no notes.
Oh yeah.
Do you have anything else from this episode, or do you want to go to the very last thing?
I don't know. I thought the jugadoo was just funny to me because I actually had to remind myself, wait, no, Disney didn't buy Star Wars until 2012 because the jugadoo looked so much like Dumbo in some of the Disney animated properties and things of that
Yeah, he
nature.
did. Jugadoo is
I
the
kind of did a little
Jugadoo is
double take.
yeah. The Jugadoo is definitely one of the more wild animal designs that Droids has done, but I quite love it myself, honestly.
They
So
really do C-3PO dirty though in in these episodes. Like every episode he has some kind of crazy injury. And this one, what his head is like sticking way up on this bouncy, his like neck turns into this spring and he has a high-pitched voice. There was the episode where he's like crawling around, like
see
he just cannot catch a break.
for me, that's just classic C3PO, honestly. Yeah. But then we
It's
get
really
the
sorry.
news that seals the arc closed. That seals
Oh
the
yeah.
arc and explains, which is and it's weird because Thal they had to abandon 3PO and R2 to become a part of this business.
Yeah.
And they kept talking about the academy, the academy, the academy, the academy. And I was wondering, I'm like, it's probably that academy, but I'm not sure. But let's be clear, Jann Kosh abandoned C3PO and R2 to become a space fascist. That's what happened.
Yeah. I think
Like,
it's one of those. Yeah, I would assume it's one of those scenarios where, maybe they don't have the whole story of the Empire,
oh,
like a
absolutely.
Luke.
And I'm not
Luke wants
blaming
to join the
I'm not
academy.
yeah, I'm not blaming Jann at all, but it's brushed off in this episode, but like let's consider what Jann is actually joining.
Yeah, especially since R2D2 and C3PO seem to be so. Actually, that's interesting. Yeah, that R2D2 and C3PO, they seem to be so well traveled and knowledgeable, and they have their ideas about the Empire, and they're just totally cool
Yeah,
with Jan going off and
and becoming a
and
space
and
fascist. Yeah.
enlisting for the Empire.
Especially
Yeah,
considering the
that's
fact
interesting to me.
and especially considering the fact that and they didn't know this when they were doing it then, but it's still true now that R2 knew what the Empire was because he saw some of the people who created it. C3PO got his memory wiped, but R2 didn't.
True.
So, but R2 was just there chilling, letting one of his masters be part of space fascism.
I mean, R2 is kind of a menace.
He
R2's
is
kind
the
of a menace
he
sometimes.
is
I'm
he
not.
is
I
he
wouldn't be
is
totally surprised.
R2D2 is
I
a
wouldn't be
menace to
totally surprised.
society. I don't know. I looked up. There's this thing. There was this text. There were these like I think it was like a yeah. There were reference articles released in 2013 before the Legends canon reset. They're written by two Star Wars authors in Legends authors named Abel G. Pena and Rich Handley. They're called the Droids Reanimated, and it actually cleared up a lot of the canon discrepancies, or at least like the Legends discrepancies, because it was part of the Legends canon with droids. So basically,
Oh wow.
the idea was that I looked this up because I was interested and it explained a bunch of the backstories of certain characters and how they fit into the canon. The Tantive 4 was raided by pirates a few years
Interesting.
into the Empire, and C-3PO and R2 abandoned ship, and that's how they got onto Ingo in the first place. That's how this whole thing began.
Oh.
Which, by the way,
Oh.
an attack by pirates on a ship working for an official, government source. That's basically how Nomad Droid starts. Actually, it's the Separatists, but still, that's basically how Nomad Droid starts. So this entire show is basically one long Nomad Droids.
I guess you could view it that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Which I find fantastic. Yeah. So what do you think of this? What do you think of this episode in general?
Hmm. In general, excuse me. I think it's a pretty all right episode. It's very confusing, kind of meandering. But it definitely picks up. It definitely picks up in the second half with the jugadoo and the fuzzum and all that greed and all that craziness that ensues. So I would say for what it is, it's droids doing what droids does best, which is lighthearted, silly, playing with different ideas and testing things out, and making kind of an enjoyable romp in the process.
Yeah, in my notes, I called it a fun, if tangential, ending to the Tamazon arc, and I'll stand by that.
Oh, it's fully
Like,
tangential.
like,
It's
like
fully
it,
tangential.
it's mostly to wrap up loose ends, and I respect its ability to do that cleanly. But it was all right. It was all right. Not my favorite, not my least favorite of this series. But let's get on to this freaking behemoth episode known as the Great Heep of this TV
Oh yeah.
special. So we're beginning R2's and 3PO service to a third master named Mungo Baobab, who is a merchant who seems a bit, who I gotta say, I at the beginning I thought he was going to be just another version of Thal or Jann, but he seems pretty different actually, at least different enough. He's a good guy, but he definitely has the bottom line in mind in a way that Thal and
Yeah.
Jann didn't.
Yeah, fair enough. He is a merchant.
Yeah, he's a merchant and he's very concerned about the bottom line. The special was written by Ben Burtt, who is the sound designer from the original trilogy, who made most of the sounds you're familiar with in Star Wars. R2D2's
I
beeping,
gotta
Darth Vader's breathing, blah blah blah.
I have some questions for Ben Bird after this one. I have some questions. That's
Uh,
all I'll say for now. I have some questions for Ben Bird after this one.
I know, I quite like this episode. I quite like this
No,
this
it's
this
a it's a
story.
it's a
Yeah,
good episode. It's a good
yeah,
episode. There's just some moments where I'm like, wait a
yeah,
second.
yeah.
This is the only episode where there were two moments where I had to go back and watch a scene with closed caption to say, did they say what I think they just said?
Yeah.
Um,
Let's I will say taking out that the all the people on the ship with sleeping gas, I thought that was a really cool detail that automatically like cued us into the fact that something sinister was happening here.
oh yeah, it was a sick moment. It was a sick idea too. Very
Um
creative.
it almost pre-reference it for me, it kind of pre-referenced the gas in Phantom Menace.
Yeah, we don't see a lot of gas attacks in Star Wars. That's interesting. Yeah, not generally a preferred method of
Of
destroying your enemies, but
yeah,
if it works, it
but
works.
so R2 and 3PO are captured by the Great Heep, and R2's taken to who wants to burst the bubble on this one?
He's taken to a Biitu,
No,
not
what
Batu.
on Biitu?
Oh, the droid harem. The droid harem. Yes, you heard me say that correctly.
We're not making that up.
This is, yeah,
This is
it's
cultural appropriation, right? Like I feel like it has to be.
what do you mean?
Because like harems are specifically like that whole idea is like a specific thing that has been like it has its origins in the Middle East in the area of the world known as the Middle East, and I feel like it's been
I
very much appropriated by many Western cultures. I'm not saying it, I don't think it's as bad as the Tamuzan people in the last arc, but it gave me bad vibes, honestly.
I didn't even know that. I was just kind of shocked that they were gonna be like, oh yeah, this giant droid like practices like polygamy with these droids that he like eats and kills to fuel himself. I was like,
It is one of the
that is really
strangest
bizarre.
things we've seen in this series so
Yeah.
far, and that's saying something.
Is this a
Um,
moment when we say Star Wars is about the why, not the how? Is this applicable? I don't even I don't
I
know.
would say so. Yeah,
Don't
I would say so.
yeah.
I think this is
Uh,
really, I think it's just this is just a fun adventure story, and I think it's really interesting. I think the Great Heep is the most threatening villain that we've seen in Droids so far.
yeah, I really
I,
was
I mean, it
afraid that he was
helps
gonna
the.
try and
I was gonna say it helps, but that I don't think we're gonna. Obviously, we're not gonna see him again after his destruction. So he doesn't have time to become campy like Kybo Ren or like Sais
yeah.
Fromm. But
It was pretty campy at the end with his. Now that was some of the most the Great Heep has some of the most ludicrous, egregious voice overacting that I've ever had the pleasure of witnessing. I mean, he's just screaming for what minute, 2 minutes on end, nonstop, pretty much in his final scene. I don't know. I think it's a lot.
yeah,
Did
it's
did
definitely a
you?
lot. I really we'll get to that when we get to that. I just want to say that I did not expect Admiral Screed to turn in this. That was a
Oh, me neither.
delight. He was basically the equivalent of a Glup Shido in the fourth episode, and they just bring him in as basically a secondary villain in this arc,
Yeah.
which I thought was completely deserved actually.
Oh
And
yeah,
a lot
sure.
of
Screed's back.
yeah,
Yeah.
it makes sense. It's funny though that he's randomly happened to encounter R2 and 3PO on two different adventures on two completely different planets. I think that's just funny.
Yeah. I don't know. Big galaxy,
But
small empire. What can you
yeah,
say? You know?
and yeah, so we find out the Great Heep is working for the Empire, which is really interesting because you could classify the Great Heep as a battle droid, and if you remember, I think this is also exists in Legends too, at least in canon. The Empire banned battle droids, even by its own military, from usage because of the anti-battle droid sentiment still lingering on from
Mm,
the Clone Wars.
yeah.
Now they bypass stuff like with the
Orby
KX
ones.
droids. They bypass stuff with the KX droids in canon, which they called security droids and not battle droids, even though come on, they're battle droid. And what was I gonna say? But I thought that was really interesting that they're this is one of those things I feel like we're seeing a lot in the Bad Batch right now, that the Empire says they're not doing, but they're just doing and keeping it really quiet. And my minor spoilers for anybody who hasn't seen the most recent episode of Bad Batch at the time of this recording, Metamorphosis, it's kind of like what the Empire is doing with cloning. They said they banned cloning in the get, like they said they're not cloning anymore. It's and they aren't there, but like and they're trying to clone, they're just not using the Kaminoans much anymore. And I also love that we got a shout out finally, because Screed says the Emperor will be pleased with this plan that they've developed. And finally, we got a shout out to the Emperor, which I'm surprised it took this long. I'm surprised it took 10 episodes to get a Palpatine shout out.
Is this the biggest presence that the Empire has had in an episode of Droids? It might be.
Oh, I'm pretty certain, yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that's actually, I think, what I loved about this episode so much is, I have the picture of the droids animated as stormtroopers in the background with their batons, and that's Star Wars imagery. This is one of the times I felt like, yeah, this is a Star Wars adventure. It's not just an adventure that happens to be taking place with a few notable characters in the Star Wars universe. No, this is a Star Wars adventure. This is the Empire is a major villain, and you could say that this is,
Yeah.
at least in Legends timeline, one of the first main acts of rebellion against the Empire.
No, you're right. Yeah, it absolutely is.
And I think that's a really interesting idea that R2 and 3PO were involved in one of the first major acts of rebellion against the Empire that nobody heard of, but
It's
it
fitting.
still happened. It's very fitting.
Yeah. Now, I don't know about you, but one thing that really interested me in it kind of interests me about droids in general, but especially this episode, I think just the way that they kind of push the boundaries of droid versus sentient being human. You might say, with the droid harem, it's like a spa. You've got droids listening to Walkman with the headphones. You got droids in the pool. You got droids, playing chess, I think. Droid romances even.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think it's just really interesting how much, and it happens throughout droids, but how much they kind of stretch and push the boundaries. And yet at the same time, they still have that rule of like, oh, we can see droids get dismantled, but we don't see we don't see like sentients get killed in this
Yeah.
show. So I think
And
there's a little bit of dissonance there, kind of, which is
there's
interesting.
there's the question, obviously, that we ask with a lot of canon shows, but I think we can ask this with this show. There's a tradition with Star Wars shows being about a lot more than the title says it is. For example, like, we assume at the beginning of the Bad Batch of the show, we talked about this last season, that the Bad Batch was for just referring to Hunter, Tech, Omega, Echo, and Wrecker. But then we were thinking about all of the friends they made along the way that helped fight against the Empire and who were outsiders in their own societies. And we're like, are those people the Bad Batch? And so obviously it's about droids, but is it just about R2D2 and C3PO, or is it about the status of droids in general in this Imperial landscape and how the galaxy thinks of them? And I feel like that the Great Heep is the best suggestion, at least for me, that is kind of what this show is about. And it's not just about those droids, it's about all droids. It's about how they're thought of in the galaxy. We go back to the first episode, I think, or the second episode. I forget which one. The one we did with McCoy. I forget which one of it was, but we did this with Michael McCoy, and I remember pointing out like the whole like when Size from and Tig from walk past C3PO and R2D2 without even noticing them as the invisible presence droids have in the galaxy to some people.
Yeah,
and
they're so overlooked often.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of interesting things about how droids are perceived in the galaxy far, far away. And that's really interesting.
Oh yeah, it's very interesting. I think obviously, especially in this episode, we kind of the vision that this show has for the way that droids experience existence and experience, I guess, the pleasure, enjoyment, emotion. It's really remarkable, I think, compared to what we get later on, because it gets so toned down in the rest of Star Wars by comparison.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, there's we didn't think there were going to be so many interesting themes in this, but they proved us wrong here. They absolutely proved us wrong. There are some really fantastic themes that we're looking into about, again, the way the droids are viewed in the galaxy, the way they're the place they have in society, and I think that's a really interesting part of this episode. I gotta say that R2D2 kamikazeing the moisture tower, and then like the Great Heep being taken down, and in a lightning storm after the evaporators go down, screaming "Curse you, Baobab!" Like that is some metal shit, and I love it.
Oh yeah,
you could not
amazing.
It goes hard. It's absolutely such a like a campy, but like absolutely they committed to it. They committed to that ending for the episode.
Yeah, I kind of like how it's unabashedly campy. It's unabashedly campy.
It's really dramatic, but it
hilarious.
knows exactly what it's doing.
Yeah, which is camp.
Yeah,
it is doing camp.
it is doing camp. I will say that. Go ahead.
I want to talk about the Empire in
Sure.
this episode, because I think what is interesting, coming off of, we're going into the new season of The Mandalorian, post Empire. We're coming off of Andor. That's still on my mind a lot. I think it's really cool. It's interesting how even from the very beginning of Star Wars, or close to the beginning, we really see in the messaging how the Empire is kind of, it's propped up by, or maybe not propped up, but it's kind of enabled, and it works because of corporatism, corporate greed, unchecked capitalism, and the people often who are doing the dirty work, who are kind of making the Empire work, who provide that mechanism of dominance, are economic exploiters, basically.
Yeah,
I just
absolutely. I
think
think
that
that's a
it's
really
cool
great
to
point.
see that goes, we
Yeah.
rebels all the way back to the 80s. And I enjoyed seeing that messaging even back then.
Yeah, I think there's some really great stuff in there, and I think also the thing I'm thinking of is like the last point of this episode that I was going to get into, which was about like, we talk about, well obviously, stormtroopers are the greatest representation of this, the faceless empire, the big tyrannical dominant forces that like strip people of identity, strip people of who they are. That's a very Star Wars thing. And what does the Great Heep do? The Great Heep uses those astromech droids as batteries. It doesn't care. It doesn't give two shits about those astromech droids. Because to the Great Heep, it's just a battery, and it absolutely wipes out that one droid when it's repowering, and doesn't even think about it. And then at the end, R2 and the other droids restore power to that beaten up aspect of joy by giving up some of their own. That's selfishness versus selflessness of Star Wars. That's the force healing of this series. That is,
Yeah.
it's saving the ones you love, not fighting the ones you hate. To quote Rose Tico in The Last Jedi, and I thought that was like intentionally not. I think that was a great like it's great light side theming that's consistent with Star Wars. It's about like it's about absolutely you can't get too attached, but it is about focusing on love over hate and focusing on seeing individuality rather than seeing everybody as expendable or just a piece of the puzzle.
Absolutely. I mean, what else do you have for this episode? I'm not sure.
I just
I don't
think
know.
this
There's
is
some
there.
crazy things like the mad doctor droid.
Yeah, that's
There's this
that's
mad doctor droid who's gonna cut up R2. And I think is this droid listening? It seemed like this droid had headphones on maybe and was listening to classical music. I couldn't quite tell. These things kind of like headphones, maybe a stethoscope. I couldn't tell what it was, but there was definitely like weird classical music that didn't really fit the vibe. So I thought maybe I don't know. It was very strange. It was Patrick Bateman-esque almost. I don't really know what to think of that. But I don't
yeah.
know.
I think there's some.
Yeah. The show's got some moments, It's got
The
some
show
moments.
absolutely has some moments. I feel like the second half of the Great Heap was, I think, my favorite episode of the show so far. If we split it into halves, the second episode would be my favorite episode of Droids we've had so far. I think it perfectly
Yeah.
nails a campy dystopian feel, and the Star Wars elements that we all know and love. And I think it nails
Yeah.
those themes. And also, bonus, as C3PO said, oh, I love a happy ending.
It would be up there for me, 100%.
Yeah,
I agree.
and I'm really excited to go into the Mungo Baobab stuff. I think Mungo is a really interesting character, and I'm looking forward to doing that. Anything else you have for either of these two episodes?
No, I don't know. Maybe this is my new conspiracy theory. Probably not true, but I gotta like after this, it's hard for me it's hard not to ship R2 and C3PO just a little
Oh,
bit,
100%.
the way
The
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 way
way
the way C3PO was the way he was reacting, the way he was emoting when R2 was taken, and then I mean, we
and
know R2
and
already is like second only to Chopper in terms of droids who are just might seem sweet, but are just absolute menaces. He's going after
yeah,
this other astromech, and then he sees C3PO, and he like he's all surprised. He's nothing,
yeah,
nothing, wasn't doing anything. Like, come on. Hashtag I ship R
yeah.
R2PO
and yeah,
R2PO. Why
and
not?
3PO
It's
crying after
2023.
he thought R2 was destroyed, but it was a fake out. Like that was one of the best
Yeah,
moments I think I've seen in the series. It absolutely worked, and obviously we know R2 survived that, but it
yeah,
treated the moment like R2,
yeah,
in fact R2 did die,
yeah.
and that made his reappearance all that more, at least in the story, for story purposes, surprising. But I think if
Not Star
I
Wars if someone doesn't fake their death.
Yeah,
If there isn't a fake
absolutely.
out death.
Yeah. If there isn't a fake, I don't know Star Wars. Yeah. But I think that's going to be it for this episode of Star Wars in a Galaxy. Next week, we are going to be diving into the actual Mungo Baobab arc of the show. Those episodes are going to be Tale of the Rune Comets and the Rune Games are the two episodes. I'm very excited to look at both of those. In the meantime, you can follow us on Twitter at In a Galaxy Pod, Instagram at Star Wars in a Galaxy. Listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Anywhere you listen to your podcast, we will be there. If we're not, email us at slvinagalaxy@gmail.com. Our stream has been once again postponed, but it is probably going to happen. It is going to be happening on Sunday, which is 2 days from the release of this episode. We're so excited to have Brandon and Maggie and Sean Room talking with us about Star Wars Seasons of Television. Epic Confrontations is going to have a double feature in March, and we're very excited about that too. But I think until next time, may the Force be with you. Always.
Always.